Matt will tell you that I really waffled on my title for this. I think I might have been the last person to give him my title because there were so many things I could think about that I might want to talk about. And I really wanted to direct my talk at the graduate students and postdoc. You know, you're just starting out, and you have so many options available to you. And most of the rest of us in the room, we've kind of already made our career paths. The fact that we're in this room with you shows that we already really care about science communication. Most of us are already involved in it. So this is really for you. And so the first thing that people are going to say when you get involved with science communication or anything to do with outreach is, who are you and why are you talking to me, right? And it's good to know your own strengths and weaknesses. For example, I usually forget to introduce myself if I don't have a slide like this. So my name is Kiyomi Jareds. I'm the librarian for chemistry, biochemistry, physics, astronomy, and forensic science at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. So I have a lot of job titles, and I generally don't put them on the slide because that would just be overwhelming. I also always put on my contact information. So you'll see my university email address, my Twitter handle, and a link to the SciPop Talks, which I will talk about later. All right, so then I like to tell people what I'm talking about. So today's topics, what can you do for your community of practice? And I'm gonna kind of talk about that throughout, but I will also wrap up with it because you can't really talk about building a broader impact with a community of practice without giving examples. And then I'm gonna talk first about writing data management plans for grant proposals, which I've managed to have quite a big impact on that, and the SciPop Talks, which we do locally. All right, so what can you do for your community of practice? The number one thing is to get involved. And as the speaker before me mentioned, there's a lot of different ways that you can get involved. And sometimes it involves doing stuff beforehand and planning, and sometimes it just involves showing up and being a volunteer for the event. If you're really stressed on time, volunteer at the event. You know, usually you're already going to a conference or a symposium, and it's really not that big of a deal to take an hour or 2 or 3 out of your day and volunteer to do something. But not only can you put it on your CV and show that you're being involved, but you will meet people through that involvement. And there was a science communication conference where I met Rachel Burks in North Carolina, and I had some free time, and I didn't really feel like going to the hotel and coming back. So I just hung around and I volunteered to help. And one of my key contacts that I made was while we were sitting there, you know, tying the little goodies for the formal dinner at the evening. So being there, you're already there. Help out if you can. Leverage your expertise. So, you know, there's always someone better than you at something, right? Until you get really niche in your research. But nobody else has the same proportion of skills and expertise that you have. So make sure that you do things that fit with your interest and your skill set, and you'll have a much better time of it. And creating collaborations. As you talk to people, and I've already talked to a couple people in this room, you see points of contact where you say, oh, you know, you have the answer to my problem, or maybe you could help, maybe I could help you with that, or I know somebody else, let me introduce you to them because they work in this also, and I think you would make a good connection. And demonstrate your impact. So now that you've done all this non-traditional things, you have to be able to explain to someone else, why should they care that you did it, and what was the impact of this? And I have to say, that's a really tough one, because if you go to an R1 like UNL, your promotion and tenure committee probably doesn't care that much about science communication, but you know who does care? NSF cares, NIH cares, the funders care, and they are looking more and more at this, but you still have to justify your actions to your promotion and tenure committee about why it was important. It does not replace your research or your research publications, but it's something to keep in mind. All right, so when I came to UNL, it was suggested that I might join the data curation committee of the university libraries. And I resisted for a good year before finally my dean took me aside and said, you are going to be on this committee starting now. And of course, when the dean says that, you say, yes, thank you very much. And our data curation committee was 6 people in the libraries, and then we also collaborated with Campus ITS. And the goal was to develop data curation support at UNL in collaboration with other campus units because of the new NSF mandated guidelines. So when I started was right after NSF said, hey, you guys are producing all this data, now you have to store that data somewhere, and it has to be accessible to other people, either by request or through an IRB request or, you know, open access. And to do this, we decided that we should provide training and consultations on writing data management plans and create and update a data curation website and guide. And so I was involved with this. I came in, like I said, about a year after I started. So there was some preliminary stuff, but I was one of the 3 people that really worked on revising and updating and getting them into the form they are now. We recently hired a full-time position last year, which was really great because the 3 of us were kind of doing like a half-time position in data curation plus our full-time job. But she's really great, and I really recommend that you contact her. So this is where we get into leveraging your personal expertise. Now I have to say, I wasn't really that interested initially in working in data curation. And the reason was I come from industry, and I was the quality control manager. And I dealt with data all the time. And to me, it seemed very common sense. You know, I was trained as a physical chemist. We did lots of computational chemistry. We did lots of experiments. And we kept track of the data, and we named our files appropriately. And you had to know a little Fortran, because this was back when computers still had ribbons, and you had to write, you know, programs from scratch to control your instruments. So to me, I'm like, why do I need to talk to anybody about this? Shouldn't everybody just know? Well, part of it's just the language of the requirements from NSF. And as you start to read it, you realize that there's a lot of ways that people can misinterpret the language of what they're asking you to do. You probably, if you're working in a science lab, do all or almost all the things that they want you to do. But you might not understand the directions, and if you don't put the information in that part or refer back to that part in your NSF data management plan, they'll just assume that you're not doing it, right? I mean, yes, they could think about it, but in reality, reviewers are very busy people, and they want to see what they expect in the expected sections. That's part of preparing your grant proposal. So I had a little bit of personal interest, enlightened self-interest, and there was a need, right? A need to understand what was being demanded of people. Communities of practice are an interesting thing, and some people can get a little snobby, like if it's not a formal community of practice, they don't count it. But in reality, all of us here in this room are part of a community of practice focused around science communication. We all have that interest, or we wouldn't have bothered to come on a Sunday. Some of us drove 8 hours to come here, so obviously it was important to us. All right, and so I had several outputs from this, and here's just a summary. So you may not know what the Coalition of Networked Information is, but it is a national coalition, I think international, and most of the people who go are deans and directors and chief information officers, so it's pretty high up there. And I did a peer-reviewed presentation, and then as part of the conference, those of us who gave those presentations also had the opportunity to submit for review a chapter for a CLEAR report, which is the publication of the Coalition for Networked Information, and they're fairly hard to get into. So that was quite the academic coup for me. And then for the Association of College and Research Libraries, which is pretty much the association if you are at a college or university, I have given 5 continuing education events. Right? So I did 3 classes, a workshop that was in person at the latest conference, and I also, with Deanne Allison, also from UNL, gave a online 90-minute session. And then the National Standards Information and Standards Organization contacted me in January and said, hey, by the way, we would really like you to do our 90-minute training workshop next month. So I was a little last minute, but I went ahead and did that. And they approached me. That was not something that I asked for. You know, I didn't even know that they were thinking about that. But because I had participated at a national level, and I was the one that they could find that does these training workshops in this format that they needed, they contacted me. And so why do I talk about this stuff? Well, here's a slide from my American Chemical Society SIMP talk on demonstrating your research impact, and you'll see that there is a very large green graph. That is how many times my handout on networking for introverts has been downloaded. Most of those were from Chemist. It got featured on one of the chemistry find a job websites, and my downloads went up by about 700 in a couple days. And I had 1 citation on that data paper. It's been out about a year and a half. And quite frankly, it's not the type of paper that you would expect to get a lot of citations, because it was really a historical snapshot looking at where we were in relationship to our peers and what was the geography at the time. So I'm not going to tell you that I got 1 citation on my paper. That's not very impressive. But what I might tell you is that over 1,000 people, as of when I looked earlier this week, have downloaded that handout about networking and involvement for introverts. And I've got invitations to speak both here and at other places because of that handout. And it was really ironic because that handout was for an 8-person roundtable at a national conference. And I really didn't think that it was going to be that impactful or that I would ever talk about that again. But it's obviously struck a chord with people. Coincidentally, the number of downloads from the Digital Commons is unique to each area. So most of us in our areas, somewhere between 100 and 400 downloads is average, but in chemical engineering, thank you, it is about 1,000 is average. So they just blow most of us out of the water. Unless you're in Extension, the top downloaded paper which is always going up, is an Extension publication on the maintenance of tractors, because those tractors are still being used and people still want to know how to maintain them. All right, so this is a statement that I am using in my candidate statement. I go up for tenure this fall. And it's about my data management work. And I had quoted a bunch of stats and given a little bit more information, and I concluded it in saying, this work has established a national reputation for UNL as one of the go-to universities for information on how to consult and provide support services for writing data management plans. The other really big ones that I'm personally aware of are the California Digital Library. They have that lovely little fill-in-the-blank template that some of you may have used, and then also Purdue University. And Purdue focuses on interviewing people to understand what their data needs are, but also on the technical side, right? And what I do is different. I focus on grant writing and grant writing alone. And I do understand the basics of the technology stuff, but that's not really my focus. All right, so SciPop Talks. This is a program that we do at UNL, although you are all welcome to host your own SciPop Talks event. It's collaborative informal science outreach. And one of the things you're going to have to do if you're doing stuff like that is explain to other people why you can justify spending any of your time doing on this, even if it's just an hour or two. But we know from recent state initiatives that STEM literacy for Nebraskans is actually a priority for the state. They're spending money on it. It's also a priority for the university, for the chemistry department, which is one of the departments that I serve, and the library's goal, especially my role as a chemistry librarian, is to support all of these other goals. So that's how I justify my involvement. There's only a few requirements to give a SciPop talk. Your topic must relate to pop culture, something in the general news, or be gross, because gross is always really popular. You are only allowed to speak for about 20 to 30 minutes when you're planning your talk. This is because most people will go over 20 to 30 minutes. And this allows for you to still have time for question and answers when someone goes almost double their time. And you also must have at least 2 interactions with the audience. And people have taken this very different ways. Some people have brought samples of food. Other people have had experiments that people can do, either with a pen and paper at a station. Some people ask the audience to vote or raise their hand or provide an explanation. So there's a lot of ways that you can do that. And we did a survey that will be published in a book chapter, hopefully sometime next year. And it showed that the majority of those who attended did so because of class credit. But they also usually found that there was something really interesting or cool, and they found it interesting enough that they were willing to write out a sentence about it to us and tell us how cool it was or how interesting they found it. This held true for both men and women, but also because of the class credit, it seems that that influenced more of the women to come, so we actually had more female attendees. So the website is in the slide. The slides will be online through the Digital Commons. And this led to a couple things, including SciPop Talks Chemistry, which is funding from the Camille and Henry Dreyfus Special Grant Program in the Chemical Sciences, which allows us to make 6 short videos connecting science with pop culture. Rachel is in a couple of them, and she'll talk later. Our next talk will be given by Matt Wilkins, and he's going to talk about the nightmares of spiders. So if you're interested, please come to that. It will be Wednesday of Halloween week. So I will let you read through these at your leisure later since we're short on time. But I really want to point out that taking the lead can really make a big difference in your ability to be involved if you want to do something that hasn't been done before. Everybody's really busy, and when you take the lead on a project, it's a lot of work. I cannot tell you how much work Matt did that I'm aware of, and I know that I'm not aware of everything that he did. And the first time something is done is always the worst, right? Because you're developing all the procedures and the documentation that you will hopefully leave for the person after you. Ask for advice, but take it with a grain of salt. There will be people who love what you're doing, there will be people who hate what you're doing and don't understand why you're doing it, and that's okay. And you can learn something from everybody, but if pushback is gonna stop you from doing it, then maybe you shouldn't be doing it because you're always gonna get some pushback. And be willing to be uncomfortable. As you start talking with people with other areas of expertise, there will be misunderstandings, and that's okay. The point is that you talk it out, and always assume that people have good intentions. Communication is vital, takes practice, and we're all imperfect. And it's okay if you're imperfect and make a mistake too. I will skip that one in the interest of time. And I just want to point out that I have more invited presentations, review panels, and things that I did not apply for than I do peer-reviewed. But I have quite a few peer-reviewed, right? So if you want to do the other stuff, you need to make sure that you cover yourself and do all the regular things too. And that is all, so I will stop keeping you from lunch. If you would like to talk more, I would be happy to talk with you at lunch, or if you are going to one of the networking dinners, I will be leading the group to the Blue Orchid.